My colleagues, we are back from recess. Senator Therese Terlai, you had the floor last.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I want to thank the Chief Justice for coming in again. Sorry for the late notice. I wasn't aware any amendments were going to be made to this chapter. Otherwise, I would have asked you to come earlier. But thank you again for coming. And so, just to recap, the amendment before us is to cut $1 million from the judiciary's proposed budget. And the judiciary's proposed budget right now in our bill looks at $33 million approximately. And so it would bring it down to $32 million. And 2019, the judiciary's appropriation level was $30 million. And I know that when you came and testified at the most recent budget hearing on the bill, that the bill you were looking at was actually $72,000 less than this amount, this $33 million amount.
Yes.
And at that time, you had given us a letter and outlined all your concerns with that budget level, having requested $35 million. And I guess if you could just describe, and of course, I know you've been, we're all aware that all the agencies were changed, recently, and that in this budget, some agencies are far less than what they even were in 2019. For example, public health, the hospital. But I was wondering if you could explain what the impact of a $1 million cut is going to be on your operations at the judiciary.
Okay. If I could just clarify, during the break I had a chance to talk to our controller. Based on our third quarter staffing pattern, our current personnel expenditures are at a level of approximately $38 million per annum. I'm sorry, $28 million per annum, with local being $27 million. We have on our staff 449 personnel, but 32 of them are volunteer deputy marshal reserves. So our current level is 417 full-time employees. In the Budget Act, we requested 427 full-time employees and 42 volunteer deputy marshal reserves. Since we made our budget request, we have calculated, and I was in error earlier, the annual cost for reinstating increments is estimated at approximately $500,000. The insurance increase for health insurance is looking at $500,000. So that represents $1 million there. We're probably going to have to, we're under contract to pay the $500,000 insurance increase. So one area we can look is to continue the freeze on increments, which would at least represent a $500,000 savings. Another areas that we could cut is not hiring people. We have had like 3 retirements, I think, this month. So perhaps we can survive through attrition, but I'm not sure about that because we have a very large payment due to employees that are retiring. They're entitled to their vacation or their annual leave hours and certain other payments. And we've had a substantial number of those this year. The other areas where the court had asked for money, we had cut our budget as much as possible. Because of the reduction in the appropriation from what we asked originally and what was represented in this bill, we had asked for $1 million in equipment for our law enforcement officers. We'd already decided we would not be able to purchase that at this point. So we have cut further from our request that was made during the original budget presentation. One area that's very minor and is of great concern to me because of the safety of children is the budget request for Erica's house was cut by approximately $50,000. The budget for that, or our contract, is $121,000. That comes from the Safe Streets Act. And although I believe we desperately need all the money, we in particular need that restoration to $121,000. The areas that were not really funded are, as previously mentioned, our requirements to provide services to the indigent that need counsel, interpreters, investigators, and other services. If we have to go back and cut further, we're really going to have to see where, other than freezing increments again, we can cut back. I just don't know at this point where that would be.
If the executive branch goes forward with as proposed in this bill, with an increase in increments, is the judiciary able to cut increments for their employees?
Not if $1 million is taken out of our budget.
No, I mean, is it like constitutional that the judiciary cut increments for their employees while the executive branch implements increments?
It's not fair to our employees, but I believe we do have the authority to do that.
All right. And the fees that were passed out earlier, you know, even when I saw these in the news, I was going to ask, can you repeal these fees? What would be the, you know, I've heard from some lawyers, you know, this has a impact, of course, on people trying to get access to justice. But what would you be able to repeal these fees?
I think the one area that probably impacts criminal defendants are some of the fees that we've put in for counseling and education program fees. Many of our trial courts impose requirements on criminal defendants to be evaluated and get treatment. It's also part of many of our diversion and specialty court programs. Most of the other fees that were increased are not going to generate a lot of money. For example, we don't have people knocking at our door to use the Judicial Education Center very often. And if we add a fee, I'm sure they'll try and find somewhere else that's free. As I mentioned, even though it may look like we're going to get a lot from court clearance fees, I don't think we are because of the numbers going down dramatically. The traffic court clearances are frequently required for driver's licenses and by the insurance companies, but when we assess these fees and thought about it, we really feel that the traffic clearance fee and the court clearance fee are fair representations of what the staff costs are. So I think the only fees that the Judicial Council could reconsider would be the client services fees and the court clearance fees. None of the filing fees were impacted. Some marshal fees went up primarily because the marshals are often asked to do training. So when you say There's Marshal Division fee increases. They're for training of other law enforcement officers. There's really not any increase in, like, for example, service fees or warrant fees or things like that.
Is there another fee schedule besides this one that was increased recently that
No.
includes filing fees? No?
The filing fee, for the most part, the filing fees, I don't think any filing fees were increased.
All right. Can you, your insurance costs increased by 500,000 versus what they were last year? Or
Yes.
500,000 is the total cost?
No, from approximately, I think it was 1.2 something, 1.2 million to 1.7 some, almost 1.8 million.
All right, and that's from a new negotiation under the new
Under the
laws.
contract we signed last week, yes.
All right. There's been some discussion about this Route 4 building. Why do you need to move probation to this Route 4 building?
Right now, probation was moved into the historic courthouse in sort of a haphazard manner. They don't really have workspaces that are appropriate for the work they do. That building needs to be modernized, and it doesn't really provide appropriate workspace. For example, the public guardian, they made an office for her under a stairwell. They sort of put up some planks of wood and put an office in there. She's a person that serves hundreds of people a year, and she should have better accommodations, not only to be appropriate to the people that come to see her, but also for safety.
When the probation, persons on probation come to see their probation officers or to check in, do they do it there are they going to go to that new Route 4 building?
Yes.
When that's ready?
Yes.
All right. All right, well, I'm sure you can appreciate that we are all in a bind here as to what we are going to do going forward. I don't know if you've been seeing that we've been trying to find even the phantom excess revenues to put some towards capital improvement projects elsewhere. And so right now we have an amendment to put some real money actually from the judiciary, unfortunately, to public schools. But I don't know, is there anything else that you would like to share with us? I mean, I very much appreciate your efforts. And again, I was not expecting this amendment at all, so.
Do you have anything else, Senator Therese?
Well, she does.
Could I answer that question? The court serves our people, and we don't just make guilty or not guilty decisions or settle cases, but we have a lot of programs. And the people that are most vulnerable in our society are protected through courts. The guardians, the family recovery court, the juvenile proceedings protect children. And our adult guardianship programs, we've been trying to increase the protection of the elderly and prevent abuse to the elderly. In our specialty courts, we treat people with drug addiction, and we treat the veterans who have come, unfortunately, into the criminal justice system. The programs that are at risk are those programs. And I would very much request the legislature to let the judiciary continue the good work it does to protect the vulnerable in our community, to try and deal with the increased criminal activity in our community. There are certainly people that belong in the Department of Corrections, but we have programs to try and decrease criminal activity by offering criminal defendants alternatives to incarceration when and only when it's appropriate. Over the years, the judiciary has been asked to take on a lot of tasks, and we've always stood up. And in these last few years, with the cutbacks in funding that have burdened all of our government, I sincerely believe the judiciary's taken the cuts and kept things going as best it can. But we've reached our breaking point. We don't have reserves anymore. And any further cutbacks will only result in a reduction of the programs and services we're able to offer the people of Guam. So I would ask that you restore or maintain the funding as originally presented to the legislature by the committee. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you. Senator Moylan, you have a question for the Chief Justice?
A question, basically a statement also, and possibly an alternative solution. Chief Justice, thank you so much for your explanation. I totally agree of the responsibilities of the judiciary of Guam, and I support you in your efforts. Of course, we're also talking about the students at Department of Education and also our veterans. As our senator, good senator from Sinahanyat mentioned, we're kind of looking for phantom money. So possibly what I like to discuss as a possible solution, and maybe now when BBMR director returns, Lester, we can get further clarification. But I just recently passed out a memo dated August 6th of 2019 from BBMR, Lester Carlson, and just referring to the bottom paragraph, the last three sentences. Basically, in his report to you, Mr. Chairman, it mentioned an amount of money available that wasn't really projected into the general fund. And this money is the physical impact due from the 2020 census. We are looking at approximately $728,487,000 on projected withholdings from the 2020 census. And so I just maybe offer that, and just why the Chief Justice is here, that maybe we can consider other ways to look at funding for the needs of DOE and also the Veterans Affairs, and maybe look at some alternative to lessen the blow on judiciary of Guam's who desperately needs the total funding for the branch of government. I'm not sure if Mr. Guerrero can answer if this money is available, the 728, or Mr. Chairman, if we wish to wait for Lester Carlson to return, we can move on then from that point. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. Senator Lee, you have a question for the Chief Justice?
Sisters Masi, Mr. Chair, I do not have a question for the Chief Justice, but I'd just like to ask you if there are any other members that would like to speak with both the Chief Justice and Mr. Gumatao, that they proffer those questions now, because, their time is very valuable, and
Yes,
thank you.
I was about to ask that. Does any of my colleagues, the members here, have any question for the Chief Justice? There being none, we'll take a short recess. Thank you, Chief Justice, and Sean for being here today. My colleagues, we are back from recess. Are there any questions to pose to the panel? Because I know that several of my colleagues here would like to ask some questions. Senator Therese Terlai.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Can I first confirm that the budget bill covers all executive branch agencies and increments, increased increments, in other words, restoring 2019 and allowing them to get an increment again in 2020?
Yes, Senator. When we did the budget for all the departments and agencies, we used their 2020 staffing pattern. In the 2020 staffing pattern, in the development of the 2020 staffing pattern, I believe the instruction was to make sure that it included the salary levels of 2019 had the increments had been given, and then also include 2020 increments that were due in 2020. So what we did is we went back and actually verified with departments to make sure that these increments were included, and all of them said it was. So we went ahead and took those levels and projected forward.
All right, thank you. And so in regards to the amendment, if I could just ask a couple questions, Mr. Chair. So the amendment is to cut the judiciary by 1 million, and we've been able to speak with the judiciary and hear their responses, but it also proposes to move the money to, these are general fund appropriations to capital improvement projects at the public schools. I have no objection to that, Mr. Chair, because my kids went to GW and had to live through the flooding and the bathrooms and all of that. So I don't have an issue with that. What I just want to know is, because we're telling the judiciary, you know, that they've received money in excess of their FY19 appropriation, what is DOE's overall status? Because when they were here, I don't remember that. I mean, compared to, you said you took out the charter schools from their budget, and so just what's the overall now compared to 2019? That's the only question.
The overall difference or variance between 2019 and 2020 is actually we increased DOE's budget by $500,000. We took away the charter school, which reduced it about a little over 10 million, and then we also increased DOE's budget by the $500,000. So charter school basically remained the same, but DOE actually grew about $500,000.
Grew or
Or
decreased?
increased by $500,000.
Oh.
Yes.
All right, and in addition to that, those are for our operations?
Yes, Senator.
Okay, in addition to that, what did GDOE request for capital improvement projects at public schools? Or did they get this money last year for capital improvement projects?
We have that information, Senator, but I can get it for you.
Oh.
I don't have it readily available, but I do have that information.
Point of information, Mr. Chair. If the question could just be restated, I just want to make sure I'm following. So the question that was asked was from fiscal 19 to fiscal 20 proposed, if there was a % change? Was that the question? I just want to
Right
make
now, I'm
sure.
asking about
Okay,
capital
For DOE.
improvement projects.
okay, if you can just restate your question.
Right
So-
now, I'm asking about
Right.
capital improvement projects,
Oh.
DOE, whether they were funded for capital improvement projects in 2019 or in 2020. Yeah.
Okay. Okay,
And 2020, yes.
Yes, Senator, to answer your question, in the 2020 budget, remember it's a lump sum. It's a lump sum budget. It's kind of like really it's going to be up to DOE how they want to break that lump sum apart. There's no specific breakdown, and also actually it's going to be up to them to decide how much capital outlay they would want to use with their lump sum.
I think my colleagues, we need to all understand, all the agencies, Steve, say it out in general.
Yeah, just again to reiterate, I'm hoping that when agencies expend their appropriation, they expend their appropriation in accordance with their expenditures. You pay salaries, you pay increments, you pay all your fixed costs, and then whatever's basically left, you can probably assign or allocate for those type of capital improvement projects.
Point of inquiry, Mr. Chair. Point of inquiry, Mr. Chair.
Madam Vice Speaker.
I'm tracking that in FY19, the appropriation for public school was $230,368,941, minus the charter schools, which we put in the 6,088 figure times 1,710 students. So minus that, it's 10,410,488. So in FY19, GDOE got 219,958 million let me restate that. 219,958,461, which is $104,224 more than what is given in this FY 2020 appropriation.
Okay. Senator Therese, you still, any more questions?
Well, is OFB, is that correct? Because that you just said 500,000 increase. She's saying $104,000 decrease. If I heard her right, right? That's what, Senator? Is that what you heard?
Okay, the difference actually was 104,000 less, but there are other programs that we are funding this year that wasn't funded last year that actually brings it above. So there's the difference.
All right. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Are there any other questions from Senator Moylan? You have a question?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. This is a continuation when the Chief Justice was here. Now, if we can address the question to Mr. Carlson for his assistance, please. Mr. Carlson, we were discussing with Judiciary regarding removing a large sum of money from them to help us out with Department of Education and also the Veterans Affair. However, I just wanted to address, and we did hand out to my colleagues here the August 6, 2019 letter you addressed to the chairman. And on the page 1, on the bottom paragraph, you discussed the fiscal impact of the 2020 census and how it will be very helpful and actually you encouraged that the amount, an additional amount, could be added to the general fund from the revenues that are to come from the projected withholding of the 2020 census. On the second page there, just below the first chart, the amount is $728,487,000. I'm just wondering, is this, if you can confirm for ROFP, if this money is available and that's something we can look at as an alternative to help the blow from the Judiciary of Guam, where we can find funding for Department of Education needs and also the Veterans Affairs. Mr. Carlson, please.
Thank you, Senator Moylan. The testimony that I provided to at the public hearing on August 6, I did note that the census was not taken into account. The revenue estimate for Bill 186 remained unchanged, and so I believe that the monies that will certainly be generated in fiscal 2020 by the activities associated with the 2020 census should be available.
Thank you, Mr. Carlson. I got a smile on my face. I appreciate that. If Mr. Guerrero can then confirm that, is that money available that we can utilize for our needs here?
Senator, you know, when we came up with the estimated revenues for the general fund operation, we took into consideration all available revenues that we project an estimate that that can be realized and materialized by the end of fiscal year 2020. We compare that revenue level with the revenue estimate that the governor submitted in the executive budget, and that amount came up to about 808, 246, 132. Our level right now is 803, which we have maybe about approximately a $4 million variance. And it's only because of the method that we use. I would like to think that, you know, we've considered all revenue estimates at the time, all revenue possible sources at the time to come up with the 803. And we chose to go ahead and be conservative, stay with the 803. The other thing, too, is that we were thinking that there would be maybe a possible adjustment, maybe on the revenues. However, by looking at the June CRER report, it shows a little drop in revenues. And that when we calculated that drop into our forecast, it actually dropped below the level of 645 that we're showing in the bill. So keeping that in mind, we wanted to make sure that we had a little cushion. We didn't want to adjust the 645 down simply because the month of June wasn't really tracking what we estimated. So we were thinking that we would just leave it at 645 and hope that maybe July, August, September numbers would give us that cushion to make up for the June shortfall. Now, you know, we could have maybe adjusted it upwards, something like, you know, the census, but simply because of June numbers were lower than expected, we felt more comfortable in being conservative and just leaving it and not making any adjustments because of that.
So the conservative amount then excludes the projected withholding of the 2020 census.
I'm sorry, I didn't hear that?
That your conservative projection would be excluding the projected withholding from the 2020 census.
So much, yeah, not so much excluding it, but using it more as a cushion in the event that our 640 level doesn't materialize.
Okay, so I understand. So it is there, but it's considered a cushion amount.
We factored it into the overall and chose just go ahead and just not increase it at the time.
Point of information, Mr. Chair, if I may, Steve, can you tell me what is attributed to the drop in June? The drop in revenues in June that you mentioned?
I believe it's just in the tax categories. We weren't tracking. I believe it might have been, I'm not too sure, I need to look at it, might have been an individual or corporate tax, because we've been holding pretty steady with withholding and business, but I need to look at the monthly trends on that one.
Okay, and it was only in June that this happened, correct?
Yes.
Okay, so like to know why.
Yeah,
Thank
well,
you.
the tracking when we included the June actually showed a $3 million decrease in our revenue levels. So instead of reducing it down by another $3 million, we just said, well, this census thing could be the cushion we needed, which was about $3 million.
Senator Lee?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. This question is for Mr. Guerrero. Mr. Guerrero, on the approximate $222 million given to DOE in this proposed budget, what is the cost of the existing warm body personnel based on the submitted staffing pattern from DOE?
I didn't quite understand your question. Can you repeat it one more time?
So I just want to know, for warm bodies at DOE, how much of the 222 in this proposed budget covers warm bodies?
Let me get that information.
Colleagues, Senator Lee, we have the information for you. Ma'am. Steve?
Hi, Senator. To answer your question, based on the DOE staffing pattern, there were 2,598 warm bodies on board. We funded 176,282,563 to fund those positions. They requested actually a total of 372 vacant positions worth about 21 million, of which we only funded 16 million of those vacancies. Please bear in mind that 90% of those vacancies are instructional positions. So that's why if you feel that 16 million is a lot of, it's for mostly instructional positions. We did include some janitorial type positions, what do you call that? What do you call those, safety officers?
Support staff?
Yes, and that comprises the 16 million.
So, Mr. Guerrero, in total, that would maybe be about in the ballpark of 190, maybe?
176, yes, almost 190.
190 out of the 222 million in the proposed budget,
Yes.
correct? So that's a lion's share of the portion, right?
It is.
Okay, and then we have the additional couple of $1 million for utilities and
Yes.
leases. So that would bring them right up to that zero amount or maybe even possibly negative. Is that correct?
Your assumption is correct, Senator.
Okay.
And please bear in mind, all the agencies are given lump sum appropriations.
Right.
Now, the lump sum appropriations is covering all expenses within the agencies, and most of them deal with salaries. You can have salary composition in the agency running anywhere from 50% to 75% of their appropriations. Not much left for operations, not much left for fixed costs. So we've actually, when we went back and reviewed and analyzed these budgets, we actually held them down to our first priority was, of course, status quo, but to make sure we funded the increments and any positions we felt that was vital to the department.
Thank you very much, Mr. Guerrero.
You're welcome.
Thank you.
Are there any other questions? And we will now proceed to Senator Tello.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And,
Please remind that we do have an amendment that's still
yes.
on the holding pattern right now. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Chair. So, you know, I had a discussion earlier with BBMR, just to make it clear, because I looked at this and I thought it was actually $910,000 and $609, but it was brought to my attention that it's really what we have right now, and that's withholding in the bank account, is actually $728,487,000, if I'm not mistaken. And then the $182,122 is based on all those jobs that the census will be creating, and you know, going out into the community, like BPT, you know, and spending whatever they're making. And I hear some of these positions make quite a bit of money. So we're looking at that, but that's not the, so am I correct in saying that first? Is that true?
The first part, I think, was a little misstated. It's not money in the bank.
Okay.
There is a attachment to my testimony that breaks down by position, by length of employment, and there's an $8 million personnel cost. So we went through some great pains to provide what we believe the withholding would be, which is here, and then a conservative estimate of what these folks would contribute into the community with the monies that they're earning, therefore arriving at the $910,000 amount.
So, okay, thank you for that explanation. So it's not something that we can just pull October, you know, 1st of coming up and start utilizing these funds for the schools. I mean, I'm the one that brought it up about all the conditions of the bathrooms. I totally support this. It's needed, the capital improvements. I just wish that we were still on DOE so that we can actually set aside money and make sure that DOE does set aside money for CIP projects. So when do we realize this amount, Lester? About when in the year will we realize it?
Like all the other withholding revenues that are projected to be received in fiscal 2020, there actually is, again, I refer you back to the testimony.
Right.
There's positions, there's lengths of terms in the positions. Some people are working for 2 months, some people are working for the whole year. It's all broken down. So I believe that you could actually have some confidence that the withholding taxes will be received.
So to realize this, though, figure we'd have to go a full year, right?
The attachment to my testimony is very detailed.
Well, sometimes, you know, some people are listening, they actually want to know what's going on, and they don't have a copy of this on the testimony, so.
Yes, and
If
you
you
don't
can
have
explain
you don't
it.
have the complete set. You only have what was passed out. I did provide the testimony to the group here on August 6th.
Okay. Okay, Mr. Chair, thank you so much.
Thank you. Do you have a question for the panel, ma'am?
I wanted to,
Okay, because we have an amendment still
oh yeah, I have
waiting.
an amendment.
Okay,
Well, wait,
no. We have an amendment that was ready, proffered,
this one? Or you mean?
the one that
Yeah, I'd like
Senator
to speak on the amendment and.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, so,
I guess, first of all, if I could just ask, Mr. Chair, yeah, so it is very confusing that when we compare 2019, what appropriations certain agencies got, and versus 2020, why some agencies are so far below what they got in 2019. For example, for operations alone, public health is $6 million below. And I know that you told us you tried to make efforts to keep them at least at the 2019 levels, you know, for the other agencies. And, you know, I don't know, I guess I just want to hear from you what if there's any rhyme and reason left in this, because it is very confusing. If DOE was not funded for, they're funded for their personnel, you're saying, and contracts, but for nothing else on top of that, is that the state of DOE's budget? Or are you saying those additional stuff that we put into DOE's budget, for example, the $500,000 for Simon Sanchez, the 1 million carryover, and the other, there were some other miscellaneous appropriations that we asked them about, like 50,000 for some other program, they said. But I guess I'm just trying to find out what's the priority. What are you saying? Do we need to put this money? Because if they don't have any money for capital improvements, then we need to allow them some. Or are you saying you expect them to pay capital improvements out of the money that you've given them, that there's enough or not? Because it doesn't sound like enough.
Senators, if you look at 2019 versus 2020, they're almost like a status quo level. So whatever the operational amounts were in 2019, they actually basically still have it for 2020. It's just how they prioritize and how to spend those funds. I can't speak on the capital improvement projects they want. Again, it's a lump sum budget. It's up to them to prioritize how they would like to spend those funds and the ranking of the priority within DOE. But I would like to think that whatever monies they were available to them in 19, they also had in 2020. We really didn't cut them anything at all. It was just bottom line, they actually received just a slight increase.
Thank you. Mr. Chair, can I make an amendment to this amendment? And the language very standard, so it's not in writing, but it's just to say for section 12, to add on the sentence that said funds shall not be used or transferred for any other purposes. So
Senator Therese, do you have that written?
I do not, Mr. Chair, but
Okay.
it's very standard language, and in fact, if I could just make an amendment that legal write it, it's just so that they use this for capital improvements and not for any
Ma'am.
other part of their operations.
Senator Therese, I understand that. Please get your staff to write it up, because I've allowed the may, shall, suppose like that, but when we're talking the sentence, we just need it written. My colleagues here have been in compliance, so let's stay with that. Do you have anything you want to comment in reference to the amendment so we can proceed on?
A point of information, Mr. Chair.
Yes, Madam Vice.
I understand that the previous speaker was asking about the priority, or where's the money being spent, and something in the like, but I just wanted to share that the capital improvement projects are well behind schedule. I've visited some schools, 3 years, 2 years, some of the requests have been to fix areas within the school that involve safety issues. So there really is a challenge with the money. And as we look forward, we still need to find $3.5 million for the OA&E for Simon Sanchez and the A&E, so that they can create that blueprint so that we can move forward with Simon Sanchez. It has been, I don't know, maybe 10 years? Over 10 years. And my alumni, one of our public schools is still in a state of disrepair, on the verge of condemnation. And so these are just some of the challenges we need to, for me, I'm realizing that we need to address these today. We say, oh, we try to do what we can, and these are the opportunities that we can do what we can. And a lot of the fixes, the CIPs, maybe this will not fix all the CIPs, but there is an intent that when we go out for Simon Sanchez, they're also going to include a lot of the schools that are in dire need of repair, but we won't realize that until 5 to 6 years from now, well before after the freshmen have graduated and long after we have left this legislature. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. Does any member like to speak on the amendment? Does anybody like to speak on the amendment? We are on the amendment, page 41, making sure, like we've said earlier, you identify the source of funding, you identify where it's going to go. It'll go to miscellaneous appropriation section, page 112, is how that money is moving. Okay? So you're taking 1 million, 1 million and moving it to, do you want to speak on the amendment, Senator Moylan?
Yes, Mr. Chair.
Please feel free.
Thank you. I just have additional information regarding the taxes on the 2020 census. Copies are being made right now, and it will be just passed out shortly.
Okay, so you have information about the census. I'm
Yes,
concerned about my colleagues. Let's try to stay focused, please. I understand you've got some information. Page 1 is page 41. Page 2 is where the money's going. Does anybody want to speak to that amendment? If not, are there any objection to the amendment?
Mr. Chair.
Yes, Senator Tello.
Mr. Chair, the reason why I'm asking if we're on the amendment to the amendment, not the previous, but good Senator, the Oversight Chair of Judiciary wanted to make an amendment to the amendment. And we know that the rules of engagement says you can't make more than 2 amendments on an amendment. So that's why I'm asking if we're going to give her the courtesy to make her amendment, and then whether it passes or not, and then we can continue on the main amendment if there's any more amendments to that. Sir.
Understood, Senator
Okay.
Tello. I've only asked, when we asked about amendments, I asked this for the past few days, get it in writing, get it to the clerk. And I think we've all been backwards for everyone. I'm only asking, if Senator Reese, if you got your amendment ready, get it floating right now while people are still asking questions, and we'll get it addressed. But if you don't have it ready, I'm going to ask, if there's an objection, then object, and then we vote on it.
Mr. Chair,
and
if
move
I
on.
may, so that
Yes,
the party...
Madam Speaker.
So that the chair can, just so that I have a better understanding, right now, we are on the main amendment as proffered by Senator, the good Vice Speaker, and Senator
Lee.
RBL, Regine Bisco-Lee, in reference to that. And it's not on the amendment to the amendment, just the main
No,
motion.
there's no amendment yet.
Did
so-
make a motion for an amendment, Mr. Chair.
Yes, you did, and I asked, do you have the amendment? I'm asking you, while we're still discussing it, if the amendment doesn't float, if you have an amendment, sir, bring it in. Don't wait, because everyone
That's
is
not it, sir.
waiting.
So, sir, we're on the main amendment as proffered by that. If there's,
Yes.
so, again, just to clarify from you so that I could follow the process, if everybody has spoken, I guess it would be time to ask if there are any objections to the motion.
That's correct, and that's
Point
what
of
I've
order,
asked.
Mr. Chair.
I'm
Yes.
Chair.
asking to follow.
Senator Therese,
Yes.
You can work on the amendment.
Right,
and
when
then
this
amend-
amendment was going to be passed out, I think we took a 45-minute recess so that it could be done. And I think
Yes.
it was even amended several times before it was passed out.
okay.
So we just got this amendment before lunch, and while we were sitting here listening to the reports about the GDOE, I want to make a very simple amendment. I'm trying to, I've got staff here, they're writing it up, they're trying to print it out, but we don't even have printers here. We have to run over to the clerk's office, the protocol to print, because we've been on lockdown now that our legal counsel has been
Okay.
banned from helping us with amendments. The clerks have been banned with helping us
Point of personal
with
privilege,
amendments.
Mr. Chair.
Senator Therese.
Point of personal privilege.
Yes.
Mr. Chair, no.
Oh,
I'm making my point of
hold on.
order, Mr. Chair. All I'm asking is for either recess, if you want my amendment in writing, or to just, it's a
Senator
very
Therese,
simple amendment,
Senator
just to say
Therese,
that these will
hold
not be
on,
used for
Senator
any
Therese.
other purpose.
Senator Therese, I'm going to give a 1-minute recess. Folks, get your amendment ready. Let's stop playing around with waiting for time. Whatever it is, all I've asked you to do is, if you got an amendment, while I'm asking the questions, get it done. We'll have a recess, get the amendment. Thank you. My colleagues, we are back from recess. I do have a copy of the amendment by Senator Therese July. Senator Therese, if you could just read it. I know exactly what you said, but if you can just please read it for the record.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. It's just an amendment to the amendment regarding the capital improvement projects at public schools. So it's the new Section 12. I'm just proposing to add one sentence that says said funds shall not be used or transferred for any other purposes, because we're cutting $1 million from the judiciary by this amendment. It's supposed to go to capital improvement projects at GDOE. So I'm just trying to ensure that it stays in that category. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Yes, thank you. Does any member wish to speak to that amendment? Senator Tello? Taidui?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Mr. Chair, you know, everyone was talking about how the schools need repair, the bathrooms most especially, even the awning. So by saying capital improvement funds for the schools, what stops the superintendent from using this money for like Simon Sanchez or one simple project when we know that they're short for revenues on that one for the A&E? So I'd like to ask the author of this amendment, is the intention to use it for any capital improvements at DOE, including Simon Sanchez? Because that would wipe out the full amount, because I know that they need the money for to continue on. So a question to the author, Mr. Chair, is
Senator
to
Therese,
that
do
effect.
you yield to that question?
So, would you like me to repeat it, Mr. Chair?
Please repeat the
I
question.
thought she was asking of the original author, so.
Yeah, no, you.
Okay.
No, I'm not, I don't have any restriction in that regard. It's only that it's going to stay in the category for capital improvement projects, not operations or other categories like contracts.
So that's it's a bit of a concern because, like I said earlier, this capital improvements could be anything that the superintendent feels needs to go to, and then here we are, all talking about our the schools, the restrooms, and awning.
right.
So, but I just wanted to bring that to everyone's attention.
Okay, is that an objection to that amendment?
Nope, not an
No
objection.
objection?
Just
Does
a
anybody
comment.
else like to speak on the amendment? Are there any objections to the amendment? No objection. Motion passes. Oh, you objected? I'm sorry. I apologize. I didn't catch that one. There was an objection. All in favor of the amendment, please raise your right hand. Motion passes. Now to the main amendment. Okay, Senator Tello? You have an objection?
Thank you,
to the
Mr.
amendment?
Chair.
Okay.
Mr. Chair, we're on the main amendment now. I
As
passed out-
amended, as
Yes,
amended.
Yes, as amended, sir. And I passed out an amendment I'd like to proffer, Mr. Chair, at your request, ensuring that everybody has a copy.
Okay. as an
Mr. Chair,
amend-
this amendment basically, what it does is it takes the amount of $885,000 that is appropriated from the general fund, but specifically coming from the income tax and business privilege tax revenues collected in excess for FY 2019 levels. And it does the same in Section 13, where it begins, again, specifically income tax and business privilege tax revenues collected in excess of the FY 2019 levels adopted pursuant to Public Law 34-116. This amendment, Mr. Chair, what we're trying to do is keep the judicial branch whole. And they came here to testify and telling us exactly what concerns they have with taking from their budget this $1 million and the impact that it'll have on increments. While everybody else in the government gets their increments, they won't be able to pay for those increments on top of the additional cost for their health insurance coverage. That alone is $500,000. Mr. Chair, I fully support the intent of where this money is going to for the repair of the schools. And of course, for the Veterans Affairs as well. But we can't keep taking from Peter to pay Paul, especially when it has to do with hurting those who are working at the judicial branch. I'm sure they're all wondering why their Chief Justice had to run down here so quickly. So, Mr. Chair, I've come up with this amendment that would find the funding, actually, I think, a lot sooner than what is assumed for here in the original amendment. Because this reality will happen about, the first or second week of October? Versus when is this going to kick into effect? So, Mr. Chair, I'm trying to find a solution to this. And this is what I came up with, so that we don't hurt the judicial branch, and yet a very, very needed funding to repair some of our schools. So I proffer this amendment.
Thank you, Senator Tatague. Senator Lee, you had your hand up and you objected.
Yes, thank you,
Speak,
Mr.
please.
Chair. I just object to this amendment. I think it's interesting that it was mentioned that they would probably, these groups, that the DOE, CIP, and Veterans Affairs might get their money faster. The language in this amendment, as I'm reading it, they might not get their money at all. So I strenuously object.
Thank you. Does any other member wish to speak on behalf of this amendment?
I just object.
You just object, Madam Speaker. Does anyone else would like to speak? There being none, do you feel you need to close?
No, I don't,
You
Mr.
don't
Chair.
need to?
Thank you.
Okay, all in favor, there is an objection, there's two. All in favor of this amendment proffered by Senator Tatague, the amendment to the main amendment actually washes it out. All in favor, please raise your right hand if you're supporting that amendment. 1, 2, 3, 4. Motion fails. Now back to the main amendment. Main amendment. Are there any objection to the main amendment? Senator Torres, you're objecting? Ma'am? Objection, right? Or do you want to
To
speak?
clarify, this is the amendment to line 1315 of page 41, just to be clear.
It's line 13 on page 41, yes, ma'am. And then
Okay.
on the second page, it's as amended amendment. Because we added that one line there that is restricted to just that reason, I guess. Yeah.
To that amendment, line 1315 of page 41, which strikes $1 million from the budget of the judiciary. If that's the amendment we're talking about, I do object.
You do object? All right. Does anybody else would like to speak? If not, you want to speak? You objected already, so did you want to speak more, Senator Torres? Ma'am?
Yeah, I just want to clarify my objection. Based on what was presented by the Chief Justice, we're talking about impacting the marginalized and the poor, impacting services by the court that affect family recovery, therapeutic courts, drug courts, counseling, probation services, including their ability to further explore probationary services for clients in a time where we have escalating drug crisis and the need to service our more marginalized members of the community are adamant. And so with that, I say let's not impact adversely an agency that is a critical agency at this very dire time in in our history where our community is just falling prey to all the ills of our society.
Thank you, Senator. Any other member would like to speak? There being none, there is an objection. All in favor of the amended amendment, please raise your right hand. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. Motion passes. Are there any questions on page 41 for chapter 4, Unified Judiciary section? Any more questions? There being none, the judiciary branch is now closed. We are now on page 44, the beginning of the executive branch. We will start with the office of Imaga Haga, Guam. Does anyone have any questions for the office of the governor? Page 45 is closed. Does anyone have any questions for the Commission on Decolonization? Ma'am, Senator Kelly.
Hafaday, I do have an amendment here. I've asked for it to be copied, so if they could please pass it out. So this amendment is very similar to one that we looked at yesterday. The Commission on Decolonization has a lot of work before it. Right now, they have also a very challenging situation where they have basically an executive director and one staff. They have 3 task forces that are each active in their own regard. And that executive director and one staff are responsible for the work and the procurement and all the other aspects of that commission. And it becomes a very heavy load. So what we're asking for is just the ability to be able to work with other government of Guam agency or agencies to work them through some of these processes. Right now, they do not have a legally certified employee to work on their financial affairs. They are receiving, at least one of them is receiving training, but that takes time. And in fact, it became sort of this catch-22 where they didn't have the training to pay for their own procurement classes because they couldn't procure their own training funding. So with that, they also have reporting and administering of a federal grant to do, and a lot of this really boils back down to accountability. We want them to do their work appropriately. We want them to be accountable for it. And we want to make sure that there aren't any errors that we're catching later. It's much better to make sure that they're on the right path from the very beginning. So with that, the amendment is on page 47 to add a new sub-item B4 to read, COD is authorized to use the services of another government of Guam agency to administer its accounting, procurement, payroll, and financial reporting requirements.
Thank you, Senator Taitano. Madam Speaker.
Mr. Chair, I want to thank you for giving me the opportunity to rise and speak in support of this amendment as it looks at authorizing the Commission on Decolonization to use and have the assistance services of another government agencies to administer its accounting, procurement, payroll, and financial reporting requirements to make sure that those provisions are in place. I would like, if it's okay with you, I know that the heading of decolonization on page 46 talks about it states Commission on Decolonization and then in parentheses COD. But if I may, just for clarification, if we can just spell out an amendment to this amendment, just to spell out COD and put Commission on Decolonization, just for proper significance to the agency.
Thank you, Madam. Okay. So you just wanted to spell it out, the COD?
Spell it out, the COD. I hope my...
Okay. All right.
No objection.
Is there any objection to just spelling out the COD, the Commission on Decolonization?
No objection.
Senator Kelly, make sure next time.
No objection.
No acronyms, okay, in the future.
Noted.
All right. Does anyone else want to speak to this? And Senator Lee?
So just Masi, Mr. Chair, I just rise in support of this amendment. I think that we all need to get behind the good work that's being done by our Commission on Decolonization, especially right now. It's a very tenuous time. So I think it's really important to be able to give them the latitude and the flexibility to administer these financial and clerical reporting requirements and just make sure that they get them done. To just Masi, and I thank the author for proffering this amendment.
Thank you. Does anybody else, any other member like to speak to this amendment? Are there any objection to this amendment? Ma'am, Senator Therese. Yes, ma'am.
Can you just clarify the amount that COD is getting? Is this the same as 2019?
Senator, it's an increase of about $158,000 from 2019 level.
Anybody would like to speak on the amendment? There being none, are there any objection to the amendment? None. Motion passes. Does any members have any question for Commission on Decolonization? There being none, we are now at page 48, Guam Ancestral Land Commission. Does anyone have any question for the Guam Ancestral Land Commission? Senator Therese.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
That's your area.
The Guam Ancestral Lands Commission appropriation that totals $378,123 in this bill is about $1,938 below what was appropriated in FY 2019. And they've told me that they are looking, they have property that they're supposed to be using as an investment to lease out and get income to pay out the ancestral landowners. So I just want to put it on the record, Mr. Chair, that, for their operations where they don't get enough appropriations, they're going to be tapping into funds that are actually supposed to be going to ancestral landowners. So if there are any other funds that OFB can find to make them whole, I would just like to bookmark that perhaps. I can't find those monies unless I'm gonna, raid them from some other agency, and I don't feel proper to do that. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Senator Therese. Does any other member would like to speak on the Guam Ancestral Land Commission? No. There was a request for funding, and OFB, would you like to speak on that?
Yes, the 2020 level is about $1,900 less than the 2019 level. I guess in evaluating the departments, the agencies, we saw that, in 2019, I won't use the word they had excess, but we went back and reevaluated what their needs are. We saw that we could at least reduce them just slightly and not hopefully hamper their operation. Yeah. And that's why you saw that slight decrease.
Mr. Chair, I have a follow-up then, just based on that. Okay. But so if I just may ask, so it doesn't affect any of the present positions that are already in there? Okay. No?
No, it doesn't, Speaker.
Thank you.
Are there any other members who would like to speak? Reference to the Guam Ancestral Land Commission? There being none, we are now on page 49, the Guam Office of Veterans Affairs. And before we move on to that, we need to identify and recognize the increase of their budget. Okay, so does anyone want to speak about that? And I have Madam Speaker.
Mr. Chair, thank you for giving me the opportunity to speak and rise in support of the budget as appropriated. I want to share with you that every week a group of veterans go on the airwaves talking about the issues and concerns of the veterans around the islands and the programs that are out there. And it was brought up to our attention that even with their indifferences within the organization and the agencies, that the funding sources continue to be taken away. And this is one commitment that we can show that this August body is supporting the Office of Veterans Affairs for their operations for fiscal year 2020, that we are truly listening, and that the fundings that are needed to run this agency efficiently is now appropriated. So I just want to say thank you, and I support the efforts for the Office of Veterans Affairs.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Does anyone else want to speak? Speak about the Guam Office of Veterans Affairs? There being none, it's now closed. We are now at the BBMR, page 50. Would anyone like to speak about BBMR? There being none, BBMR is closed. We are now at page 51, Civil Service Commission. Does anyone like to speak about Civil Service Commission? There being none, Department of Administration, page 52. Does anyone want to speak about DOA, Department of Administration? There being none, Department of yes, Senator Reese.
Could I just ask, maybe it's too fast for me, but where is the appropriation for the health insurance? Is that incorporated in every agency's budget, or is that in DOA, or how does that work?
Senator, for active employees, it's incorporated in every budget. For retired employees, it's in the miscellaneous appropriations.
Okay, so if it's incorporated in their budgets and the amount comes in higher than what has been calculated by OFB so far, they're just going to have to take that out of their operations to cover the insurance? Is that how it works? I mean, is there an agency cost? Yes, right?
We normally cover employee and share out of the payroll, okay? But the retirees is what it is that this body appropriates for. So it's the annual premium associated with the retiree medical dental life that is normally what we have to address.
All right, so do you foresee, Mr. Byrne, any shortfall in the agencies as a result of potential increased contract costs, or what do you call it, employer's share?
Senator, we're still working on the procurement of the policy, so I really can't say at this minute.
I'm just asking because these agencies that are very slim, kind of carry over from 2019 or less, like the 6 million at public health, then yeah, this is an additional impact to them. So, all right, thank you.
Thank you. I see hands now. Senator Lee, before I get to the Vice Speaker for the amendment. Senator Lee.
Masi, Mr. Chair. Mr. Chair, this question is for Director Byrne from DOA. I just wanted to know if you could tell us a little bit about the status of the health insurance negotiations. The status of the health insurance negotiations.
The status, if you can comment.
If you can comment.
Yeah, if you're.
Senator, we're still finalizing the health insurance negotiations. I have a meeting with the governor tomorrow, after which time I hope that the announcement can be made.
Thank you, Mr. Byrne. Mr. Chair, could we also get an answer to the aggregate cost of the program for this year?
The aggregate cost program for which year, sorry?
For the health insurance program for this year?
For which year, Senator?
For this current year?
This current year, it's based on enrollment. I think we calculated on the enrollment in January, including agencies that self-fund, like GPA and GWA, it's about 110 million.
And Mr. Byrne, if you're able to comment, do you anticipate any savings based on your present negotiation?
I really can't say at the moment.
Okay.
But thank you for I assure you that as soon as we get to the end, and we're anxious to get to the end, and as you know, we were unbearably held up during the summer, we will let you know. Right?
Thank you very much.
Senator Vice Speaker. Ma'am.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Mr. Chair, I have an amendment on page 54 to 55. I'm sorry, it's to section 11. So it's to amend section 11. And basically, this section 11, I want to thank you and the OFB staff for ensuring that there was appropriation for support for our council, because last term in the previous administration, there was not an appropriation funded, nor was there a functioning council. And so I want to thank you for being proactive in ensuring that the charter schools are well taken care of, or the council, so that they can provide the checks and balances that is required of the government to ensure that the money is being used for the school and for the children. So basically, Mr. Chair, it's just to amend. So it says in section 11, Guam Academy Charter School Council administrative support. The sum of $150,000 shall be allocated from the DOA fiscal year 2020 appropriations to fund clerical and administrative full-time staff. We're including this. We crossed out support, and we put, instead of support, we put full-time staff, to prioritize the Guam Academy Charter School Council's operational requirements provided by the Department of Administration, including but not limited to an administrative office, conference room, office equipment, furnishings, and supplies. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Vice Speaker. Senator Tello.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. You know, this is the same type of amendment I was trying to get through, but it was done differently. But what I'm happy about is that now we're finally going to put somebody in this position to oversee the charter school and maintain that historical data and provide the services needed to ensure that the charter schools are given what they need, the support they need. DOE has the same type of support through their central office. So, Mr. Chair, I stand in full support of this, and I wanted to thank OFB for meeting with me to find this funding of $150,000 to support this office. I really appreciate you meeting with me and helping find this. And I just really happy to see that this is happening, and I'm looking forward to getting on the phone after this and calling a few board members as well as the prior chair for the Guam Academy Council and let her know that this is finally going to happen after so many years of her saying that even people before her asking for this support. So I stand in full support of this amendment. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Senator.
Just a point of information,
Yes,
Mr. Chair.
Madam Vice.
This amendment is absolutely different from the previous speaker's amendment that was tried to move earlier. That was for an executive director. This is to look for additional employees, not one, but a possibility to get 2 or 3 more employees to support the council. This has nothing to do with an executive director. Thank you,
Okay.
Mr. Chair.
Point of information, Mr. Chair, as well. This is actually providing the support for the charter schools,
Okay.
and that was the whole intention. The intention is there, whether it's whether it's an executive director or a clerical staff.
Thank you.
It is there.
Thank you. Senator Lee.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I rise in full support of this amendment, and I'd like to thank the proffer of this amendment for doing her due diligence, especially as the chair of education. I know that she has done a lot of work over the last few months, visiting each of the schools, really trying to identify what the challenges are to include our students at our charter schools. And so I thank her. I want to thank the OFB team for working together, but also just for providing language that everybody can get on board with and make sense. So I'm just glad that we're able to move forward with this, and I support this amendment. Ask my colleagues to do the same. Thank you.
Thank you. Senator Castro, your hand was up. Was there any other senators? Yeah, Senator Kelly and Senator Therese. Okay, so Senator Castro.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I rise in full support of the amendment. I do want to commend the author and all those who contributed to finding the means. I know that in a prior body in March and August 2017, we attempted to do the same through your committee, and I'm just very grateful for this provision to be in this budget bill. We all know that the charter school community is a thriving school community, and however way we get the support, I'm just forever grateful. So thank you, Mr. Chairman. Commendations to the prime author of the amendment. Thank you.
Thank you. Senator Kelly.
Seduce Masi. I too want to make sure that there's support and that our charter schools are able to thrive. I'm just wanting to understand just some of the particulars of the Department of Administration a little bit, just so I can visualize in my mind how this would all work. So typically when the office offers this kind of support, what does that typically look like, or what has occurred in the past in providing this kind of support?
Senator, we haven't had to do this in the past. This will be a new venture, but it seems perfectly achievable.
So I had been thinking of just looking at a model. So there's never been this level of support provided to any other entity in the past?
Not to my knowledge, Senator.
Okay. So, but it's good to hear that you think that it will be functioning. That was largely what I was after, is that you felt it was achievable and it's functioning, because it needs to be something that works on both sides. So thank you for assuring me of that. And I do commend the author of this amendment and OFB and others for finding this money and identifying it and putting it to this purpose. It does help the schools function well. It helps hopefully take care of our students well, and keeps everybody accountable in all the ways we want them to be. So just Masi.
Senator Therese, you have...
Mr. Chair, could you look at subsection 11?
You're referring to the bill, page 54?
Yes.
Yes, ma'am?
What does yours say?
On the bill, it says charter school administrative support. The amendment identifies.
Okay, just wanted to check. Is this the same thing or different? This is an addition?
No, it's the same thing. It's just identifying to make sure that they have the authority to hire specifically for this.
Oh, I'm sorry.
That's
So
all it's for.
this amendment amends this section?
That's correct.
I read it wrong. Okay. And so this money is not
There's no new
an
money.
appropriation, it's just an allocation of DOA's money
That's
to
correct.
this purpose? All right, thank you, Mr. Chair.
Okay. Senator Torres?
Mr. Chair, I think in reading it, it probably reads better, because right now it seems like the way that the amendment is written, it's to allocate $150,000 to fund full-time staff. And then it has including but not limited to. So perhaps the way it should read is, and I'll read it out loud, the way I think that it grammatically is clearer. Subsection 11, Guam Charter Schools Council Administrative Support. The sum of $150,000 shall be allocated from the DOA fiscal year 2020 appropriations to fund clerical and administrative support, comma, including full-time staff to prioritize the Guam Academy Charter Schools Council operations requirement, an administrative office, conference room, office equipment, furnishings, and supplies. I'm thinking that the word support is important because that corresponds with an office, a conference room, office equipment, furnishings, and supplies, which is not necessarily the same as what would be the needs of a full-time staff. Do you see what I mean? Grammatically, I think it's confusing, because it seems that
Yes.
it's a full-time staff and the others are incidental to the full-time staff, but I don't think it necessarily.
Is there any objections to that change, bringing back support and adding including? Are there any objections?
No, I don't know if she's, Mr. Chair, if I may, I don't know if she's proffering that as amendment to the
Senator Torres,
amendment,
are you
so-
proffering that for amendment?
I am proffering it. So what I would recommend is you rather than striking out support, keep support in there, and then all the,
Including.
It is,
and then the underlined section that is suggested to be put in there, put that in after the word including, comma. So
Thank-
it would
thank
just
you.
be a matter of,
2 words.
yes.
Thank you. Are there any objections to that amendment, to the amendment?
And Mr. Chair, just to give our legal bureau the opportunity to make
The
any technical
and
corrections,
administrative.
right.
Yes. Any objections to that amendment?
no.
What it is, Senator, to my colleagues, what it is that on the third line of the amendment, instead of striking support, leave support, comma, underline including, comma, full-time, and that's all. It's just return a word, add a word, and a comma.
No
That's all.
objection, and no objection that is not in writing either, Mr. Chair.
Okay. As long as only 1 or 2 words. You can work this. Yes, ma'am.
Point of inquiry.
Okay, well, we'll take, okay, our clerk will confirm with them. Let's take a couple minutes recess, get this clear, and I agree with her. Get it writing, but like I said, 1 or 2 words, not a problem. If you talk the whole sentence, it's a different story. Thank you. My colleagues, we're back from recess. Senator Torres, I know you have a motion because your
Thank you.
amendment is circulated.
Yes, Mr. Chair, I withdraw my previous motion and submit this new one that's in writing. And it essentially is to reinstate the word support and to move the addition of full-time staff to prioritize the Guam Academy Charter Schools Council operation requirements to another area within that paragraph, just so it's clearer of the intent.
Senator Torres, first the motion is to withdraw your first amendment, and then we'll just, it's just for the formality of recording.
Yes, to withdraw my first amendment, which was just
Okay.
stated.
Are there any objection? None. And your amendment is as provided. Are there any questions to the amendment? To the amendment, or to the amendment? No, an amendment. Questions to the amendment? To the amendment. Any questions? No questions. Are there any objections? None. Now to the main amendment that has been amended, or the amended amendment, right? No, you just agreed to the amendment to Senator Nelson's amendment. So on the amendment that has been amended, are there any objection? None. Motion passes. Now we are still at DOA. Are there any, I know there are questions for DOA because some of my colleagues have approached the DOA office. Are there any more questions for the Department of Administration? There being none, Department of Administration is closed. We are now at the Department of Revenue and Tax, page 56. Are there any questions for the Department of Revenue and Tax? Other than money. Ma'am, Senator Sharice?
Just one, so the Department of Revenue and Taxation has increased by approximately $840,000 in this fiscal year 2020. And it's not obvious to me where that's going to go, but I guess I just wanted to know, do we have an estimate of like if this is going to a particular function that we can expect increased revenue as a result? For example, enforcement of the B&B or anything like that?
No, Senator, it's just an increase that we gave them on top of their FY 2019. So it's a lump sum budget. Again, it's up to them to figure out where they want to spend that in the priority listing.
Are there any other questions for the Department of Revenue and Taxation? There being none, Department of Revenue and Taxation is now closed. We are now on page 58, Bureau of Statistics and Plans, PSP. Are there any questions for that branch, that bureau? There being no questions, PSP is now closed. We are now at the Department of Public Works. Are there any questions for Department of Public Works? There being none, Senator Therese. Yes, ma'am.
I guess I'm just going to check. So when we said in section 3, subsection 3, rather, about the, so first you appropriated the Guam Highway Fund, a certain amount to DPW for the village streets and roads resurfacing, and then subsection 3 gives them the balance as of September 30, 2019, also appropriated for the same purpose. Is there an estimate? What are we tracking to have as a balance at that time? Can I just ask that?
I'm sorry, Senator, what did you say?
For subsection 3 for DPW, what is the projected balance that is going to be appropriated by that provision? It says it's appropriating the balance.
Do you have the tracking? No. Senator, at the end of 2018, the fund balance was 1.6. And I'd like to turn it over to BBMR for the tracking for this current year.
While they're looking for that, Mr. Byrne, in FY 2019's budget, there was an appropriation of the FY 2018 balance also. Did that get transferred to DPW, or did that get used by DPW?
Yes, and that would be part of the balance that I just mentioned.
Okay, thank you.
And is that good? Okay.
The latest special fund tracking for the Guam Highway Fund, the current year's appropriation was $22,808,000. The tracking is $25,085,000. So it's about $2.2 million above.
Thank you very much.
Any other questions for the Department of Public Works? There being none, Department of Public Works is closed. Guam Contractors License Board. Any questions for the Guam Contractors License Board? Nothing? None? Guam Contractors License Board is closed. That's page 60. We're now on page 61. Guam Board of Registration for Professional Engineers, Architect, and Land Surveyors. The Appeals Board. Is there any questions for this section? You want to ask a question, Madam Speaker? Okay, no. There being no questions, page 61 is now closed. We are now at the Guam Police Department. Are there any questions for the Guam Police Department? Yes, ma'am. Senator Therese.
Yes, so between FY19 and FY20, there's an increase of $1.66 million. I just want to know what was the goal of OFB through that increase? Is that an increase in officers or something else?
Yes, Senator. In the staffing banding they provided, they indicated there were a few positions there that were going through the cycle. We went ahead and budgeted for that. We understanding also that there was, I believe, somewhere in the vicinity of maybe 30 positions that were recruited in 2019 that we had to fund for 20. So those also were funded in the 2020 budget.
Police officers?
Yes.
Thank you. Would you say a 30 plus of how many total?
Let me verify that number, but I think it's just around.
Well, an approximate is
around there, yeah.
30 new officers for 2020 versus 2019.
I know there were new recruits being recruited in 2019. Let me verify the actual number on that.
Thank you, thank you. Go on, Mr. Chair.
Does any other member have any questions for the Guam Police Department? There being Senator Moylan. Please press the mic, please, so that everybody else can hear you.
Sorry, Mr. Chair, I'm just getting a printout of the amendment for GPD. I can just ask for a brief recess. I'm printing out an amendment.
You have an amendment?
Amendment for GPD.
Okay, well, while we're waiting for, does anyone else have any questions for GPD? Because we're still also waiting for OFBs to provide the information that Senator Therese asked. So while the OFB is still searching it, we will take a few-minute recess.